If someone had told Miles Harland that a chipped mailbox would nearly cost him everything, he might have laughed. But standing in his driveway that morning, clutching a letter stamped with gold foil and veiled threats, he wasn't laughing, not even close. It had all started with a cup of bad coffee. His machine sputtered like it was on life support, coughing up a weak, half-brewed mess that looked more like dirty water than caffeine. Miles squinted at it and sighed. Great. Even you've turned against me. At 46, Miles didn't expect life to hand him champagne and roses. But he hadn't expected it to come at him like a slow, silent ambush either. His days had become a series of minor betrayals, off-key mornings, judgmental stares from new neighbors, and now a notice from the Willow Creek Preservation Committee that hinted at war. Miles had lived in his family's cedar-paneled house since he was a teenager, nestled in a once quiet suburb of Columbia, South Carolina. The two-story home held decades of stories in its walls. He could walk blindfolded and still find the squeaky floorboard in the hallway, the one his dad had always meant to fix. But that neighborhood had vanished. In its place were manicured lawns, boutique gyms, and newcomers who jogged with golden retrievers and overpriced headphones. They glanced at Miles like he was the last surviving relic of a forgotten era, and one they'd rather bulldoze. And then there was Elliot Drayton, president of the Preservation Committee. Elliot ran Willow Creek like a man auditioning for a villain role in a daytime soap. Everything about him was too polished. The silver hair, the tailored suits, the smile that never touched his eyes. The committee had become notorious for finding problems where none existed. Last month, it was a complaint about the visual inconsistency of Miles' flower beds. This time, the letter accused him of hosting an unacceptable disruption to the community standard. Translation: his mailbox paint was chipped. "You've got to be kidding me," Miles muttered, waving the letter at his dog, Duke, a loyal mutt who'd been with him through it all. Duke just yawned. Miles felt it in his gut. This wasn't about mailboxes or paint. This was about pushing him out. Later that evening, at the community meeting, Miles walked into a room that reeked of old coffee and barely concealed hostility. Folding chairs were arranged in rows like a courtroom, and at the front sat Elliot, flanked by his clipboard-wielding allies. The moment Miles walked in, Elliot's lips curled. "Miles Harland," he said, like reading off a warrant. "Good to see you." "Wish I could say the same," Miles replied. "Got your little letter. Real poetic stuff. Threat to neighborhood harmony? You guys holding auditions for fiction writers now." A few chuckles broke out from the braver residents. Elliot's smirk didn't flinch. "We simply enforce the rules. It's not personal." "Funny," Miles said, arms crossed. "Seems personal. Always seems to be people like me who get targeted." The room tensed. Elliot leaned forward, voice silk-wrapped steel. "If you can't meet community expectations, perhaps it's time to reconsider if Willow Creek is the right place for you." Miles didn't blink. "I was here before your coffee shops and yoga moms. I'll still be here when your Tesla needs a jump." He walked out that night with his jaw tight and fists clenched. The battle lines were drawn, and the first shots had been fired, but things were about to get uglier. The next morning, his phone buzzed nonstop. Messages flooded in from neighbors. "Miles, have you seen the HOA site? Man, they're coming for you hard." Still groggy, he opened his laptop, and there it was, that a banner across the top of the homepage. "Miles Harland, a threat to our community." Below, it was a gallery of grainy, poorly lit photos of his house, angles that made it look abandoned, notes about his neglected exterior, cracked driveway, and disturbing lack of aesthetic cohesion. "Are you serious?" Miles whispered, rage simmering just beneath the surface. He slammed the laptop shut and paced the living room. Duke tilted his head from the couch. "I'm okay, buddy," Miles muttered, "just planning a revolution." And then, like a scene from a spy movie, a black SUV pulled up across the street. Tinted windows, engine idling, a camera lens barely visible through the crack in the glass. Miles dropped the lawn mower and marched over. Before the driver could react, Miles leaned in. "I don't know who sent you, but tell him this. I'm not scared. And if they want a war, they just got one." The man inside blinked, rolled up the window, and sped off. But the real bombshell came that night at exactly 7:45 p.m. The doorbell rang, and when Miles opened the door, Elliot Drayton was standing there, flanked by two committee members, envelope in hand, eyes glittering. "Evening, Miles," Elliot said calmly. "We need to talk." Miles Harland, a 46-year-old resilient and honest man, was fighting to keep his home. Having faced numerous struggles in his life, Miles was determined to continue living in the house he had worked hard for. But the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association HOA, Elliot Drayton, had set his sights on that very house. Elliot, manipulative and smooth-talking, was always willing to ruin others' lives for his own personal gain. One day, Miles ran into Elliot, the HOA president, in a heated confrontation. Elliot had decided to devalue Miles's home to push him out. "It's just business, Miles," Elliot said with a smirk. "If you're forced to sell, we'll redevelop it into something better." A knot of anger tightened in Miles's chest. "This isn't just business, Elliot," he shot back. "This is my home, and I won't let you take it." Elliot shrugged, indifferent. "If you want to keep it, better find a way to hold on," he said. Miles, his resolve hardening, watched Elliot walk away, knowing that he wouldn't let this go. This wasn't just about a house. It was about defending what he loved, no matter what. That evening, Miles sat at his kitchen table, a foreclosure notice laid out in front of him. His parents' faces stared back from an old family photo. A sense of anger and frustration welled up inside him, but beneath it all was a steely resolve. "This house isn't just mine," he muttered to himself. "It's theirs. And I'll be damned if I let someone like Elliot take it from me." Max, his loyal old dog, barked in agreement from his spot on the floor, as if to say, "Damn right." Miles grabbed his laptop and started compiling every piece of evidence he had against the HOA, emails, letters, photos, anything he could use to expose their wrongdoing. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. For days, Miles pored over documents, piecing together a picture of corruption. The HOA, which was supposed to improve the neighborhood, was running a racket. Kickbacks, unapproved fines, missing funds, it was all there. "These guys are messier than a middle school cafeteria," Miles muttered under his breath, jotting down another note. Max, his ever-faithful dog, sat at his feet, as if to say, "You've got this, boss." That afternoon, Miles decided to take the fight directly to the neighbors. He printed out flyers, old-school paper flyers, and started going door to door. Most of his neighbors were polite but hesitant. Some nodded in agreement when he explained how the HOA was targeting specific homeowners, while others gave him that look, the one that said, "I'd help, but I don't want them coming after me next." At one house, he encountered Mrs. Bellamy, his two-faced neighbor. She stood at the door, clutching her yapper of a chihuahua. "Miles," she said quietly, "are you sure you want to do this? They don't play fair." Miles smirked. "Fair? Mrs. Bellamy, these people couldn't spell fair if you gave them the F and the A." She nervously chuckled. "Well, just be careful. They've got deep pockets, and you're just you. Thanks for the vote of confidence," Miles replied dryly, handing her a flyer. "But don't worry about me. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." The real fireworks began at the next HOA meeting. Miles walked in, folder in hand, a confident smile on his face. The room was packed, standing room only, thanks to the flyers he distributed. Residents who normally avoided HOA meetings had shown up, eager to hear what Miles had to say. At the front of the room sat Elliot Drayton and his cronies, looking as smug as ever. But when he saw the crowd, a flicker of unease passed through his eyes. "James," Elliot sneered, leaning back in his chair. "What a surprise. Here to pay your fines, or are you just looking for more attention?" Miles ignored the jab, stepping to the front of the room. He slammed his folder down on the table with a dramatic thud, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "what I have here is proof, cold, hard proof, that this HOA has been lying to us, stealing from us, and using their power to line their own pockets." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elliot laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Miles. This is ridiculous." Miles held up several documents. "Then, explain these," he said, his voice sharp. "These are contracts showing that Elliot here has been awarding neighborhood improvement projects to his own company. And these," he waved another stack of papers, "are records of funds missing from the HOA budget, funds that just so happen to match the down payment on Elliot's brand new Tesla." The room erupted in chaos. Elliot's face turned beet red as he scrambled to defend himself. "This is slander. You can't just make wild accusations." But Miles wasn't finished. He pulled out one final piece of evidence, an email from Elliot himself, explicitly stating his plan to push certain homeowners out of the neighborhood so he could sell their properties to developers. That Elliot's jaw dropped. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. The meeting descended into chaos. Phones were pulled out, and soon someone started recording Miles's speech. To anyone watching this, Miles said, addressing the camera directly. Know that this isn't just about me. It's about every homeowner who's ever been bullied, overcharged, or threatened by a corrupt HOA. Stand up for yourselves. Fight back. They don't win unless we let them. By the time Miles left the meeting, the tide had turned. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak up were now rallying behind him, while Elliot, for the first time, seemed completely out of his depth. The next morning, Miles's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, emails, it was all coming in. Word of his takedown of Elliot Drayton spread quickly. But the one message that caught his attention was a voicemail from Lisa Henderson, a local journalist. Mr. Harland, she said, I heard about last night's meeting, and I'd love to cover your story. Call me back when you can. By midday, the HOA was in full-blown crisis mode. Miles had sent Lisa every piece of evidence he gathered, and she wasted no time publishing an explosive exposé titled Neighborhood Watchdog or Corrupt Dictatorship: The Dark Side of Suburban HOAs. The article went viral, with screenshots of Elliot's emails, photos of misappropriated funds, and testimonies from neighbors who had been mistreated by the HOA. Elliot tried to spin the story, of course. He held a press conference, or rather, he yelled at reporters outside his office. But his denial was shaky, his excuses laughable. By the end of the day, Elliot was forced to step down as HOA president. That evening, Miles sat in his living room, sipping a cold beer. His house felt like home again, and he could almost hear his parents' voices in the back of his mind. We did it, he said softly, nodding to their picture. Finally, after all the fights, the house was his to keep.